All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing along the path of the Star Wars 5th edition monk by going into their monastic vows. Now, quick reminder, if you are enjoying this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important for other people to see this, and to, let me know that you actually enjoy this stuff. There's that too. What we talked about before, the monk for Star Wars 5th edition is not massively different from the D&D 5th edition monk, but they do make some they make some small changes that have big impacts. Things like part of their martial arts feature lets them dash and disengage as a bonus action, basically the same way a rogue would be able to do that. Their martial arts die gets bigger, it gets up to a D12 versus just a D10. And they can grapple using dexterity athletics instead of strength athletics. And then a few other kind of changes. Things like they can use their wisdom or charisma for their key abilities, which are called focus in this, things like that. So if you are very familiar with the D&D 5th edition monk, as I am, and you jumped into a Star Wars 5th edition game, and you just decided to play a monk, a lot of it is going to feel very, very familiar. Almost to the point where it's almost a detriment. And this is not to say that there's anything wrong with this. This is more just how your brain works. The closer something is to something else, the more often you're just going to assume it's the wrong thing. So people like me that are very familiar with monks in 5th edition playing a Star Wars monk are probably going to make more mistakes than someone that just started with the Star Wars 5th edition monk. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's just how our brains work. And as I mentioned before, I like the version of the monk that they have in here. I think a couple things in here actually just kind of feel better than how they're presented in D&D 5th edition. I'm not saying I would use this in 5th edition because, again, this is a more powerful version, so it would be unbalanced. But the philosophy that I interpret from what I'm reading, I agree with. I think this really catches the essence of the monk. But something we talk about all in this channel constantly is this thing called defining features, which is a core concept of 5th edition class design. And one of the quote-unquote defining features of the Star Wars monk is this thing called monastic vows, kind of. Quick refresher on 5th edition class design. Every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. And in order to do that, they have these things we call defining features. Defining features are either something unique to the class, or maybe it's not unique, but they get them earlier, or they can use them differently than any thing else. And in order to be a defining feature, it has to show up within the first 2 levels. Monastic Vows shows up at level 2, and this is effectively kind of Eldritch invocations for the monk. And this is every single Star Wars 5th edition has this. So from that definition, it's not technically a defining feature, but because everybody has it. But every single class has their own little list of them. So they flirt the line. It's effectively, the idea of one of the complaints from people that play things like 3rd edition Pathfinder, that kind of much more crunchy of a version of D&D is there's not enough quote unquote customizability. which is a misnomer because there's tons of customizability. What they actually mean is there's not enough complexity. And one of the defining features of 5th edition is the idea that they wanted to reduce needless complexity. The idea that, like, I made an example. I guess it's been over a year now. When I was talking, I was talking to someone that was talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, because I kind of compared the monk in Pathfinder 2nd Edition to the monk in 5th Edition. I said, yeah, basically the big difference is it's harder to play a Pathfinder 2nd Edition monk than it is to play a 5th Edition monk, and you can do less. And the rebuttal was, no, it's more customizable. I said, no, it's more complex. Doesn't mean customizable. And my example was, well, what if we played a different game? What if we played this brand new game that I'm calling More Chess? And what it is every single piece has a different way that they move. You know, so the king's pawn can only move diagonally on odd terms and straight ahead on even terms, but the queen's pawn can only move straight ahead on odd turns and diagonally on even turns. And then anytime that you try to take a piece, every piece has a different numerical value. And so, and I go into this just nonsense explanation of how I think I only get through like 4 or 5 different pieces. And yes, it is significantly more complex than chess. It doesn't make it a better game. It actually makes it a significantly worse game, because in order to get people to play it, there's a much higher barrier to entry. You have to know a lot more, and because of all of that complexity, it actually limits your choices. So the idea that 5th edition is not customizable enough has never been true. Any character you can make in 3rd edition, I can make in 5th edition, and I generally can make them anywhere between about 3 to 5 levels earlier, just because there aren't 7 different feats that I have to take in order to make something worthwhile. My favorite example is dual wielding. In order to build a dual wielding character in 3rd edition or in Pathfinder, you have to have a dexterity at least of 15. They have to take the, I have to remember, the 2-weapon fighting feat, the improved 2-weapon fighting feat, and generally it's a good idea to have the ambidexterity feat. And in order to take that, you have to be, depending on the class, you have to be a minimum of, I think, either level 5 or 7. So you cannot dual wield effectively in Pathfinder or 3rd or 3.5 until you are level 7 or 5. Again, depending on the class, like Rangers get a couple of those feats early. If I want to play a dual wielding... Oh, and you also have to be dexterity based. You cannot be a dual wielding strength based character. If I want to be a dual wielding fighter, at level 1, I pick up 2 hand axes. And I can dual wield with them. And I can hit. I have a positive attack modifier on both of those attacks. So yes, it is significantly more complex, but that doesn't actually give you more options. And that's generally when I'm looking, anytime I see people adding complexity to 5th edition, the barrier that you need to, the thing that you need to overcome is, does this complexity allow me to do something that I could not do without this complexity? That's the standard that I'm always going to hold these to. Because if anything that's put in there basically becomes, well, yeah, but I can do this in 5th edition right now, and I don't need a bunch of extra rules to do it, I'm going to say, yeah, this is needless complexity. This is making the game harder for people to play. That being said, Monastic Vows and all these other kind of, effectively, they are the return of 3rd edition feats. 5th edition feats are big changes to the character. Taking a feat is supposed to massively change how you play your character. Monastic Vows and all these other ones are going to be more piecemeal changes to a point. I like the idea behind them. And and I think quite a few of them are really interesting and can be really, really cool. They do allow you to basically piecemeal a character together in ways that you can't in D&D 5th edition. My issue comes with effectively kind of balance and the idea of choices versus the right choice. I made this. I've mentioned this quite a few times. If you give a player, 10 choices they can make, but one of the choices is always going to be more beneficial than all the other ones, you haven't actually given them any choices. What you've done is you showed them a bunch of wrong answers and a right answer. And if they choose any other thing other than the right answer, then they're doing themselves a disservice. And in something like D&D or any tabletop RPG, they're also doing their party a disservice because combat balance is based around how many players are in the party, and if you have one person whose actions and bonus actions and reactions just aren't as useful as the rest of the party, well, the combat is going to get more difficult, and they're not going to be able to keep up their end. Yes, this has been a long explanation for something that should be relatively simple. Let's actually dive into the monastic vows. I'm going to take a drink real quick. You guys may notice I'm actually drinking something that's not water. And that's because I have been very, very ill, as I mentioned before. And fun fact, ginger is a natural anti-nauseant, or whatever they could call that. So when I get nauseous, this is the only thing I can drink other than water that doesn't make me sick. So, all right, let's dive into these monastic vows. So to kind of understand how these monastic vows work. Monastic vows, you get your first one at 2nd level, second at 7th level, third one at 13th level, fourth one at 17th level. So, one of the things that you do need to kind of focus on when you're thinking about balance is you only get 4 of these, and 2 of the 4 don't show up until mid-tier 3 at the earliest. The reason I bring that up is there's been tons and tons and tons of data collected on D&D 5th edition, and what they found is most campaigns and most adventures happen between the levels of about 3 and 10. So tier 2, there's 4 tiers of adventuring in the D&D. Tier 1 is 1 to 4, tier 2 is 5 to 10, tier 3 is 11 to 16, and tier 4 is 17 to 20. The vast majority of D&D happens in tier 2. So most characters that you build are only going to ever get access to 2 of your 4 monastic vows. So when you're looking at them, you do have to kind of acknowledge the fact that, okay, there's a very limited number of these. You basically get as many monastic vows in that time period as you do feats. So they, or you can have as many as feats. Feats also, you have to trade off whether or not you want ability score and improvements. So they are technically slightly less rare than feats. So understanding that interactions between them are going to require a relatively high level character that you're probably never going to get to. It's one of the reasons why multi-classing is so popular with min-maxers and things like that, because they never have to multi-class beyond about level 10 to 12. And in that, in tier 2 and very early tier 3, that actually is a really nice sweet spot where you're not getting too many higher level of abilities that are super amazing. As I mentioned before, once you hit level 11, that's when you start getting the really cool abilities. And so once you start getting into mid tier 3 and definitely tier 4, multi-class characters fall off in power massively, especially if you've taken more than maybe 1 or 2 levels in another class. You start finding out that you can't learn the really nice high level, 7th, 8th, 9th levels to spells. You just don't get access to them if you're a spellcaster. You don't get access to the most useful martial abilities or class features because you simply can't. You're still dealing with stuff in tier 1 and to tier 2, and everyone else is getting their tier 3 and tier 4 abilities. So that being said, let's actually talk about these. So, in total, there are 18 monastic vows, which is something that I'm a big fan of. If you are going to give your players choices, you need to give them actual choices. And what I mean by that is this happens a lot in some of the subclasses for 5th edition, where they will go, like the Rune Knight is a perfect example of this, where they'll go, well, you can choose, one rune here, and then you get an additional rune, at this level, this level, this level. And what eventually happens is they have 6 choices at like level 2 or whatever, but they get a total of 5 over the lifetime of their character. And so what happens is the ones that you choose early on are the ones that you actually want. And as you get higher and higher, you just get less and less useful abilities because there's just not that many. And so it basically turns into, okay, what is the one you want the most? Okay, what's the one you want less than that? What's the one you want less than that? You're basically choosing which is the least bad as you get higher and higher. That can be mitigated by having a lot more choices. I generally tend to say minimum you should have double the number of choices as they will be able to get total. This is a fair amount over double. This is quadruple. So I like that. But as we mentioned before, if you have 10 choices, but one of them is always the right answer, you don't really have 10 choices. So let's see just how useful these things are going to be. So, the first monastic vow is the Vow of Deflection. You can use your reaction to divert a strike when you are dealt damage by a melee weapon attack. When you do so, the damage taken by the attacker is reduced by a d10 plus your dex plus your monk level. This effectively is what do you could call it? Catching arrows, effectively, but melee version. I can't remember what it's called now. Now I feel really stupid. Do they not have it here? Deflect missiles. There we go. So deflect missiles has been something that has been a monk thing for multiple editions. It's a cool thing from kind of wuxia movies and the things like that, where they could catch arrows out of the air. It's always been this. This is effectively the melee version of that. Again, I play monks. In the Adventurers League, I played a Shadow Monk from level 5 up to level 17. And I played it for like 4 years. Deflect missiles is useful. It was something that I used a remarkable amount. And one of the big problems I had with deflect missiles is just that you only get one reaction per turn, and so you really needed to go, okay, because I took a feat called Defensive Duelist, because I kept getting my ass handed to me over and over again. And Defensive Duelist lets you add your proficiency bonus to your armor class as a reaction if you are wielding a finesse weapon in one hand and nothing in the other. So it was super, super useful. Vow of Deflection is effectively going to work kind of like Defensive Duelist without as much limitations. It doesn't require you to wield a certain weapon. It doesn't require you to wield only one weapon. And it works differently. Instead of raising your armor class, you are literally just reducing the damage. Thank you, phone. And both of those things are useful in very, very different situations. The nice thing about Vow of Deflection is there's never going to be a situation where you can't use it. Whereas Defensive Duelist, if they roll a 30 on their attack roll, which happens at higher level creatures have like plus 11, plus 12, plus 15 to their attack rolls sometimes. There's no Duelist anything that's going to change that. However, Vow of Deflection is. Now, it does have some very specific things in there. It has to be a melee weapon attack. So there is some kind of wiggle room where if you get attacked by a melee spell attack, Vow of Deflection would not work because it has to specifically be a melee weapon attack. And other features that don't use a melee weapon in some way would not be useful with Vow of Deflection. Do I think Vow of Deflection wouldn't work if it could be used on any melee attack? I mean, again, this really mimics. This is the melee version of deflect arrows or deflect missiles, and deflect missiles has the same limitation, the ranged weapon attack. So I don't think it would be broken if it just said a melee attack, especially since deflect missiles is something that every single monk gets. This is something that requires you to use one of your monastic vow slots. So I could almost I could see it being very justifiable to just say any melee attack you could use this on, and I don't think it would be super overpowered. Do I think it's super underpowered without that distinction? No. I think Vow of Deflection is super, super useful. Again, I took a feat to deal with the fact that I kept getting my ass kicked. This monastic vow would have been significantly better for me, and I could have used that for either a different feat or just improving one of my attributes, because again, monks are multi-attribute dependent classes. They have to have both dexterity and wisdom in D&D, and this dexterity and either wisdom or charisma. So yeah, the other thing that's is nice is with the upgraded patient defense, you get an additional reaction. So you theoretically could use Vow of Deflection twice in one round. Again, it's not in this PDF, but it is on the website. You're limited to one reaction per turn. But that would be that other thing where if two different targets try to attack you, which happens when you're a monk, this would allow you to deflect two different attacks instead of just one. And at that point, you would already be using your patient defense, so they already have disadvantage on their attacks. There's a good chance that with Vow of Deflection, it would go from maybe turning 5 attacks into one attack that actually hits, into turning 5 attacks into none of the attacks actually do any damage, because Vow of Deflection reduced it to either nothing or into such a low number that it doesn't matter that they hit you. And again, that's what monks do best, is that action economy manipulation, being able to force get rid of actions from the enemy through stunning strike, through getting them to waste them by attacking you, to getting them to waste ranged attacks by catching their darts out of the air, from turning their ranged attacks into your ranged attacks by taking it and throwing it back at them. That's what the monk does. So I love Vow of Deflection. I think it's super, super cool. And I think if you want, this is something I've wanted to do, and I can't figure out a way to do it currently in D&D 5th edition. And I think Vow of Deflection would be something I would use in that. I want a reaction-based monk. And what I mean by that is a monk that counterattacks instead of attacking, because that is a valid focus in martial arts, is to not be the aggressor in a fight, and to let your opponent kind of start it so that you can react to them and things like that. It's a very difficult thing to do, but it can be very very effective, and it looks super cool. And you can't do that in 5th edition, mostly because of that limitation to the single reaction. You just wouldn't be able to be very effective doing that. But I did build a monk like that in Open Legend for a one-shot that we did for Realms of the Wild. And it's really cool. And something like Vow of Deflection could be something really interesting to kind of build that style of character. Now, again, with the focus on action economy in 5th edition, we talked about this in the Final Fantasy XIV crossover thing I did. You really would have to almost build an entire class around reaction-based stuff, because 5th edition is just not built that way. But I would love to see a reaction-based monk. I think it'd be super cool. So, Vow of Deflection. Moving on. By the way, tip for anyone that's doing anything involving public speaking, whether it's acting, whether it's just talking to people from like a managerial perspective, don't drink carbonated beverages. It's a bad idea. Like I said, the reason I'm doing this is because it is settling my nausea. It's much better drink water. All right, so moving on. The next one is called Vow of the Devoted. This is the one where I start having issues, because Vow of the Devoted Vow of the Devoted effectively turns the monk into what's called a third caster. In D&D 5th edition, there are basically 3 different kinds, or technically 4 different kinds of casters. You have what are called full casters. They are things like the wizard, the bard, the druid. These are characters that at level 1 they can cast spells. They can cast spells all the way up to 9th level, and they actually have the same number of spell slots across the board. Every single full caster has the same number of spell slots, and their action is generally taken up using one of their spells. Spells are a big deal. You have half casters, which is basically a non-casting class that is taken, this is a hybrid class. Paladins are half casters, rangers are half casters. I'm trying to think if there's off the top of my head if there's another one. Anyway, so half casters, they generally won't be able to cast spells at level 1. They generally get them at level 2. They can only cast spells up to 5th level, and they have less spell slots than full casters. Then you get what are called third casters. And the reason we call them third casters is when you multi-class, there's actually, to figure out how many spell slots you're supposed to have and what kind of spells you can cast, or and what level spells you can cast, there's actually a little bit of math you do. You basically add up the levels of your full casters, you add up half the levels of your half casters, and you add up a third of the levels of your third casters. That's what we call them, third casters. And these are things like the Eldritch Knight Fighter, the Arcane Trickster Rogue. This is where you've taken a subclass that is giving you the ability to cast spells. You're going to have even fewer spells than a half caster, and they generally don't go above, I think it's 4th level. I know that's what they do here. Vow of the Devoted turns your monk into a third caster. Now, something that is unique about spellcasting in Star Wars 5e, they do not use, I'm going to say this wrong, I believe it's called the Venetian casting system, which is how D&D has worked with spells all the way, other than 4th edition. which is basically you have spell levels and you have spell slots. And you cast spells using first level spell slots, second level spell slots, third level spell slots, things like that. Star Wars 5e, you still have leveled spells. You have cantrips, which are 0 level spells, then first, second, third, fourth, things like that. But you use points. Basically, you have a spell point system. And there's technically go away. There's actually 2 different versions of there's actually 2 different versions of quote unquote magic. You have force powers and you have tech powers. Vow of the Devoted basically turns you into a half caster that can use force powers. If I were to compare it to D&D, force powers would be kind of akin to arcane spellcasting from what I've been able to see. And tech powers would be kind of similar to divine spell casting. Kind of. Not really, because both of them work, they're just different. And the interesting thing about force powers, if you're familiar with how Star Wars lore works, is you actually have 3 different flavors of force powers. You have light side powers, you have dark side powers, and then you have what are called universal powers. And the way that you cast them is actually different as well. Light side powers, you actually use your wisdom score. Dark side powers, you use your charisma score. And universal, you can choose either or. So there is a lot of kind of control and things like that built into the force casting system. But Vow of the Devoted gives you access to all the way up to 4th level spells. Now, you don't get access to 4th level force power, until 17th level. And you have limited force points, but this still turns you into a 3rd caster. And I've mentioned before, something that's really, really common when people are building either new classes or new subclasses is they will just add in spell casting to kind of avoid having to come up with features. But the problem with that is spell casting doesn't work like that. Most of your spells are going to take your action. With the monk, your action, when we talk about opportunity cost, your action is not only 2 attacks, it's also your flurry of blows, which can be an additional 3 attacks. So anytime you are choosing to use a force power instead of your attack action, which is what the monk generally uses their action for, you have to weigh, is this force power worth bare minimum 3 attacks or possibly up to 5 attacks? So that's the first problem. The way that they get around that when you're looking at something like the Eldritch Knight is built into the subclass. They give you incentives on and ways that you can kind of weave in your spell casting and your martial abilities by just giving it as effectively an Eldritch Invocation. You're not doing that. You are effectively just going, okay, you are now playing 2 half classes instead of a full class. Or you're playing 2 half characters instead of a full character. Something like Vow of the Devoted should be built into a subclass so as the class gets higher. Because again, opportunity cost at low level is not really as big a deal. Especially, if you take this at 2nd level, you only have 1 attack and 1 bonus action that can turn into 2 bonus action attacks if you have a flurry of blows, but you only have 2 focus points at that point. So it's not that big an opportunity cost at low levels to just go, okay, well, now you have a choice between make an attack or use a force power. But the higher the level it goes, that opportunity cost gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and so much of the monk is built around those martial abilities, that Vow of the Devoted becomes nearly useless at high levels. Unless, again, I haven't looked through every single force power because, oh my god, there's a lot. Unless there are super, super overpowered force abilities. Now, there's also some limitations built into this. You can't use light or dark force powers. You can only learn universal force powers. It does lean into your either wisdom or charisma for your focus. You're either wisdom or charisma for your for your force powers. You're not having to gain an additional attribute or anything like that, which is nice. But again, something like this as just an a la carte thing that you can add to the class is only useful for low-level play. And again, you only get 2 of these in that low-level play area. So wasting one of them on Vow of the Devoted, it's just not great. I would much rather see this built into a subclass. Because again, it just doesn't work very well. Again, it'll be super useful at level 2. And then by the time you get to 7th level, when you're getting your second monastic vow, it's starting to get to the point where you're really not using your force powers very much. And you have to choose a different vow that's just going to be more beneficial to you. And then again, once you get above about level 10 or level 11, you're probably almost never using your force powers because you have significantly more useful things you can use your action for. Yeah, this is one where I don't think it should be a monastic vow. I think it should be a subclass. If you want to have multiple subclasses that deal with using the force and things like that, I think that's perfectly fine. Just because you have one, like again for the fighter, you have the Eldritch Knight that can cast spells. Just because that one exists doesn't mean that you can't make other magic focused subclasses. And the same thing would be true here. You can make a bunch of force focused subclasses, and they would work better than just a monastic vow for it. So I'm going to move to water now. Moving on. The next one is Vow of Fate. Just to clarify, all of these are in alphabetical order. Some of them have prerequisites where you can't get them until certain levels. Vow of Fate is one of those. You can't take this one until 7th level. And this one, I will tell a story after I read this one. When you finish a short or long rest, roll a d20 and record the number rolled. Once before your next short or long rest, you can replace any attack roll, saving throw, or ability check made by you or a creature within 5 feet of you with this roll. You must choose to do so before the roll. I had a buddy in the Adventurers League. We were both DMs. And we did the convention circuit, which was basically in Wisconsin, where I live. D&D was born here in Lake Geneva, which is just on the border to Illinois. But D&D was born here. We have probably like a dozen or so different board gaming conventions every year. And that's just here. There's also things like Gen Con, Origins. And so what the convention circuit was I would contact these different conventions and say, hey, if you give me a hotel room and free tickets to your convention, I'll run games for you. This is an extremely common thing. If you want to go to conventions for free, the absolute easiest way to do it is to contact the Adventurers League and say, hey, I'll run games for you if you give me free tickets. And if you run enough, they may even give you they won't give you your own hotel room, but they'll give you a spot generally with 4 other people at least. in a hotel room, and you get a nice little vacation for free. It generally means you are doing nothing but D&D over the weekend, but that's what I like to do. So that's what I did. Anyway, he created this character that we called the DM Killer, which is basically if there was a DM that just was not playing nice, he would take this character out. And what this character was, that it was a halfling that had halfling luck. It was a... he also took the lucky feat, and he was a divination wizard, which had something very similar to Vow of Fate, where they would roll 2d20s at the beginning of the day and could just use those in place of rolls, any rolls that they wanted sometime throughout the day. And it meant that he always re-rolled all of his nat ones, and he had, I think, 5 different rolls per day that he could just re-roll or change. And it was super, super annoying for DMs because it was very rare that bad things happened to this character or the character's party because he had so much statistical control over rolls and the things like that. And he understood statistics and knew when it was beneficial to re-roll something, when to go, it's not worth it, just take the L on that. So Vow of Fate 100% would be something I would take to build a character like that. That being said, it's just a useful ability. Like, there are so many different uses to Vow of Fate, despite the fact that it is only a single roll. It is nice you get it on a short or long rest, because, again, monks are kind of built to value short rests a lot. And there really isn't a roll that can't be used. High rolls generally are going to be things that you replace your rolls with. Low rolls are going to be things that you replace your enemy's rolls with. And because I roll like shit constantly, more likely than not, what would happen is I would roll it, I would get a 2, and then I would go up and do a stunning strike, and before they had a chance to roll, I would go, don't worry, I already saw that you got a 2, and I would get a free stun out of it. Is that the absolute best use for it? Again, the nice thing about Vow of Fate is depending on the roll that you make, there are so many different situations where it's going to be useful. One and done abilities, again, are not my absolute favorite. I talk about the elixir paradox all the time. The idea that in like Final Fantasy, there's these items called elixirs. Elixirs are really rare. You cannot buy them. You cannot steal them. There's a finite number of them in the game. You can only find them. What generally happens, and they're really good, they give you all your hit points and all your magic points back. One drink. What happens to a lot of people is they get to the last boss and they never use their elixir because it's so rare and I can never get another one. So what if I waste it here? They get all the way to the final boss, they'll beat the game with like 9 elixirs out of 10 in their inventory. And that's what happens with what I call one and done abilities, is players just don't get to use them. With this in particular, because it resets on a short or long rest and there are so many situations that you can use it in, I don't really feel bad about this being a quote-unquote one and done ability. You're going to be using it a lot. It's not so useful that you're like, no, I can only use this in the best situation, and it's also not so useless that you're like, I don't really care about this. Why would I ever want to use this? So yeah, overall, Vow of Fate, super cool. I like that. Moving on. The next one is Vow of the Fighter. You get a fighting style. Now, Star Wars 5e does, to be perfectly honest, I think D&D 5e could take lessons from Star Wars 5e. They have 32 different fighting styles. Now, again, some of them are kind of pointless. And by that I mean some of them are just like, oh, well, you can do this a little bit better. There's a few of them that I don't see almost anyone ever to taking. So again, if you give someone 10 different choices, but 3 of them are just pointless, did you really give them 10 choices? Did you give you 7 choices and then 3 things that no one ever picks? That being said, I would say the majority of them are interesting and make changes. The other thing that's kind of cool is they also have this thing called Fighting Masteries, which are upgraded versions of fighting styles that I think are limited to fighters and maybe a couple other classes. Monks can't get them, I know that. And there's 32 of those. Vow of the Fighter, this is the kind of monastic vow style thing. This is the kind of quote Eldritch Invocation style thing that I'm a big fan of because I like building weird characters. I do. One of the last characters I built for the Adventures League is what I called my Spellslinger. He was a Hexblade Warlock and Shadow Sorcerer hybrid. And the reason I built him like that is because the Hexblade Warlock could get Eldritch Blast and could also get the ability to add their Charisma modifier to damage of Eldritch Blast, which effectively turned it into the same as making a weapon attack for a fighter. And the Sorcerer gets sorcery points that they can use to quicken Eldritch Blast, and it effectively meant that because Eldritch Blast gets multiple attacks as it levels up as a cantrip as you get to higher levels, at higher levels I could make 8 attacks, and so it would be effectively 8d. I think Eldritch Blast is a d10, 8d10 but plus 40 damage for the cost of, I think it was just 2 sorcery points. I kind of I built them as they had these 2 wands that were shaped basically kind of like guns. And so they had 2 holsters. I didn't, dual wield or anything like that. This was just for flavor, but it was kind of, you bring him out and just go, and he was a gunslinger, effectively. And it was super cool. I like doing stuff. Vow of the Fighter will allow you to make weird monk characters, to be blunt. And I like that. I think that's cool. I think that's the kind of thing a monastic vow should do, is allow you to really create interesting, unique characters. The other thing that's kind of cool about Vow of the Fighter is it changes. Again, you have 18 different monastic vows you can take. One of them has 32 different options. So it just keeps expanding the amount of choices that you have without creating too much complexity, because some of the fighting styles monks are just never going to be able to use because they involve using weapons that the monks can't use in that. But by having like a combined pool that any character that gets the option of a fighting style, which I think almost all of them can take a vow or whatever they could call it, that'll give them a fighting style. It's a way to add a lot of complexity without actually creating a ton of complexity. There's only 32 fighting styles. Only is a weird word to say there. But because different classes are going to be able to use them differently, it's a way to add complexity without adding needless complexity, and I like that. So yeah, about the fight. When I go over the fighter in Star Wars 5e, I will probably go over the fighting styles and the fighting masteries, just because they are going to be a huge part of the fighter. They might also be something that the Guardian deals with. I'm not going to go over them here because this is already a long of a video. So, moving on. Vow of the Focused. You can substitute Strength, Constitution, or Intelligence, chosen when you to take this vow, for Wisdom or Charisma for your monk class features, except for other vows and monastic tradition features. So this one is weird, to say the least. And I think that last thing is basically just so that you can't take Vow of the Focused and Vow of the Devoted to be a strength-based force caster. But that being said, remember how I mentioned I thought it would be overpowered if you could just replace your wisdom with anything? Well, this lets you do that, and I don't really think it's overpowered. Again, monastic vows, you only get 4 for your entire character life. And for the life of the character that you're probably going to be playing them for, you're only going to get 2. So using one of those to allow you to use strength, constitution, or intelligence instead of charisma or wisdom, I think that's a justified offset, because you, again, opportunity cost, you could, instead of taking Vow of the Focus, you could be taking Vow of Deflection, which has a lot of things you could do, or Vow of Fate, which we already talked about was super, super useful, but instead you're changing which attributes are important to you. Which, again, just kind of expands your build possibilities. And again, I like that. I'm not opposed to stuff like that. I think it's just super cool. I do not know this system well enough to know if that is kind of the min-maxer's vow of choice. Again, playing D&D for as long as I have, and because I got my start doing Adventures League stuff, min-maxing is the name of the game in the Adventures League. Possibly because in Pathfinder Society, which is the Pathfinder version of the Adventures League, min-maxing is not encouraged, it is expected, to the point where I have seen people get thrown off of tables if their character is not min-maxed in Pathfinder Society. And I've seen it happen multiple times. It wasn't like just one bad apple. Like it happens often. And not only have I personally seen it, I've had a lot of other people tell me, yeah, that's how it works. So a lot of people that came to the Adventures League were either former Pathfinder Society or people that were still playing the Pathfinder Society and just wanted something else to play as well, because Pathfinder Society is extremely limited. You can only play every adventure once. Not once per character, once ever. As soon as you play an adventure, you can never play that adventure again, or at least that's how it used to be. And if you run an adventure, you can never play that adventure. So the Adventures League is significantly more open. And so we had a lot of crossover between the two. Min-maxing was a thing, and the min-maxers' thing of choice for monks was to take a shadow monk and take 2 levels of warlock, so that they could get Devil's Sight, which allowed them to see in magical darkness. And then what they would do is they would cast darkness on a pebble, hold the pebble, and they would have a moving field of darkness where they could see inside of it and no one else could, and they would have advantage on all their attacks. That was the monk min-maxers' invocation of choice. It happened constantly for people that wanted to play monks. There were a few things like that it was just always like the Sentinel and Polearm mastery feats were another min-maxer thing of choice. Like, these are just things that we knew that min-maxers would always use until DMs started to understand them well enough to go, okay, well, we can build encounters that aren't completely destroyed by one combo. And encounters started becoming more interesting and fun. So I have no idea if Vow of the Focus is anyone that plays Star Wars 5th edition, in the comments down below, let me know, is Vow of the Focus one of those things that people just always take because it allows them to really min-max their builds, or is it just something that some people take and some people don't? I truly would not be able to find that out unless I did a lot of Star Wars 5th edition playing like I did with D&D 5e's. So, yeah, moving on. The Vow of Fortitude. This is another one that's you have to be at least 7th level. You can use your action or bonus action to end one effect on yourself that is causing you to be blinded or deafened. This one feels weird because, again, action or bonus action, there are so few situations where it's ever going to be advantageous for you to use your action when you can do the exact same thing with a bonus action. You're almost always going to use your bonus action to do it. And the deafen condition, really, I have, in the, 6-7 years I've been doing this, I've been running games now, I have never seen a character that had been impacted negatively by the deafened condition. Ever. Blinded condition, yes, that can be bad, but there's a lot of different ways to get out of the blinded condition. And again, monastic vows, you only get a total of 4, only 2 in the range that you're probably going to be playing them. Wasting your higher level 1 on Vow of Fortitude seems pointless. Especially since there's other things that give you better benefits. There's a blind fighting style, which would effectively, even if you were blind, would allow you to do that. There's things that give you blind sight. There's so many other things that you can do, that the only reason this would be really useful is if you were a ranged monk, which you can do. It actually works remarkably well in Star Wars 5th edition. It doesn't really work in other than maybe the Kensai. The Sun Soul monk is supposed to be a ranged monk. It's not very good. You can do a ranged monk in Star Wars pretty well, and it could be a pretty cool build. For that specifically, all the other things that kind of negate blind and things like that aren't going to work for you because you need to be able to see at range. But that being said, yeah, this one just, I don't understand why it's 7th level, because again, by the time you're 7th level, you have a bunch of other things that you can use to deal with the blinded condition. And again, nobody cares about the deafened condition. I think the prerequisite just doesn't make a ton of sense. And yeah, I don't see a whole lot of use for Vow of Fortitude ever. If it had other things that it added to it other than, hey, you can remove the blinded condition from yourself. Because again, most blinded conditions you're also going to be able to save out of anyways. And monks become save machines. Especially once you get to, 14th level, you have proficiency in all saving throws and can re-roll them. So it's very, very rare that you're ever going to be blinded. So yeah, Vow of Fortitude, this is one of those ones that, yes, there's 18 choices. This one is not one I would ever see anyone choosing. There's so many better things that you could choose than Vow of Fortitude. So, moving on. Vow of Freedom. You ignore unenhanced difficult terrain, which is unenhanced if you're a D&D veteran is non-magical. And when you would use your action to break free of an effect that is grappling or restraining you, you can instead use your bonus action. There's a lot of useful things about this. First of all, monks are hypermobile. The hypermobility is a really, really useful thing, especially since now you can disengage the bonus action without using a key point to do it. Hypermobility, difficult terrain can cause issues with that. I personally think, at least from what I've seen, DMs don't use difficult terrain nearly as much as they should. I think it can make a lot of combat much more interesting to play. But it's just, at least in the Adventurers League and most of the adventures that I've read, difficult terrain just really isn't that big a thing in 5th edition, and it should be. I don't know how different it is in Star Wars 5th edition. But that aspect alone could be useful. I don't think, if that was all it did, I don't think it'd be worth a monastic vow. However, being able to break free from a grapple as a bonus action, super useful. One of the reasons that grapples can be as useful as they are is action economy manipulation. Generally, to break a grapple, you have to use your action to do it. To make a grapple check, you can use one of your attacks when you take the attack action. But to break it, you have to use your action. So, when you're looking at opportunity cost, a creature that has multi-attack has to sacrifice 2, 3, 4 attacks to break out of a single grapple. The same is true for the monk. If you are grappled, which again turns your really, really useful hypermobility into nothing, gives you a speed of 0, having to waste your action breaking the grapple sucks. It means you can't use your bonus action to get your free attack. You can't do flurry of blows. Like, it really, really limits you. Being able to use your bonus action to do that, beautiful, wonderful, amazing. Bonus action, break the grapple. pop them in the face, especially since most monsters that grapple will also restrain you, which gives you disadvantage in all your attack rolls and a bunch of other bad stuff. So being able to bonus action break the grapple, punch them in the face, stunning strike them, and then run away, just wonderful. That, and I also have, again, the monk that my favorite monk that I have played, my favorite character, my Shadow Monk Aether. He could teleport, and I haven't seen a teleporting subclass yet. I'm not saying they don't exist. I just haven't seen one that can teleport. And teleporting is the ultimate you can't grapple me thing. So this just gives you the ability to go. I like that. And again, because you can use dexterity acrobatics to break grapple checks, and monks are dexterity machines, generally, if you are grappled, you're really only going to need to try breaking the grapple once. Like, you're going to get out of the grapples but pretty quick. And a lot of times the reason that monks get grappled is monsters will have auto-grapple attacks where if they hit you, you are auto-grappled, like the Utyug. If it hits you with one of its tentacle teeth things, you're auto-grappled and restrained. This gets around that, so... yeah, that's another one that can be... again, a lot of these are going to point you into a certain style, which I like. You can use this to Vow of Freedom if you want to be that hyper mobile style thing. Vow of Freedom is going to give you the ability to do that. Doing hit and run tactics. I don't know if they have a mobility feat in this. I haven't looked through all the feats yet. I would be surprised if they didn't, though. Something like the mobility feat combined with Vow of Freedom means anytime you attack something, they can't make opportunity attacks against you. So you literally can just run around, stunning strike. I'll give you an example. We were doing an adventure in Storm King's Thunder, and we're going through this crypt, and we get into this room that has these 4 beholder statues in it. And the door locks behind us. As soon as we walked into the room and we saw 4 beholder statues, all of us went, oh, look, we're going to fight 4 beholders. Like, the whole party is like, yeah, we know what's going to happen. And the DM's like, you don't know this. And we know it's going to happen. He's like, okay. So what happens, I have a weapon of warning on my monk, so I get advantage on initiative. I roll super high. What I ended up doing was because I was hypermobile, I went to each one of these beholder statues and I punched them. Stunning strike, move to the next. Punch, stunning strike, move to the next. I stun locked 4 beholder statues, which weren't full beholders, thank God, because we wouldn't have beaten 4 beholders. But I stun locked 4 beholder statues for 3 rounds. Now, that took 12 key points, so I think I blew through all my key in a single fight. But it worked super well. And the DM even, like, the DM was one of those, I'm not even mad, I'm just impressed. Because I took what was going to be, not only was going to be a difficult encounter, but it was designed to kind of wear down the party so that by the time they got to the end that they were hurting. And I turned it into something that was pretty soon. And so things like Vow of Freedom, if you wanted to be that style of character where you go around and you stunning strike, or you do a bunch of other, because there's a few other things in here that we're going to talk about that can really change what you can do. Vow of Freedom would give you that ability to really be that hit and run style monk that can be a lot of fun to play. So, yeah. Moving on. The Vow of Intuition. You can no longer have a disadvantage on attack rolls against creatures within 10 feet of you due to not being able to see them. So again, when we look at the Vow of Fortitude versus Vow of Intuition. For a melee-based character, the blinded condition, that is the big issue you're going to have, is any attacks that you make are going to be made with disadvantage. Vow of Intuition deals with that. Doesn't require a bonus action to deal with it, so it doesn't require you using the action economy. It just deals with it. And you can get it at 2nd level. It doesn't have the prerequisite of 7th level. So when you're looking at both of those at the same time, other than in very specific situations, Vow of Intuition is always going to be more useful than Vow of Fortitude. That being said, there's not a ton of situations where you are going to have issues of not being able to see creatures. Like, again, this just means that you don't have disadvantage on attack rolls. It doesn't give you blind sight, which, if I remember correctly, I'm gonna go back. Yeah, so one of the fighting styles you could choose is called blind fighting style, which gives you blind sight out to 10 feet, or if you already have blind sight, it's increased by 10 feet, and you can use your bonus action to double the range of your blind sight until the start of your next turn. If you compare blind fighting style to Vow of Intuition, which again, you can get blind fighting style by choosing Vow of the Fighter, it is significantly more useful than Vow of Intuition, because Vow of Intuition just means you don't have disadvantage on attack rolls. It doesn't mean you can see them. It just means you don't have disadvantage. Blind sight, you can see anyone within 10 feet, and you can use a bonus action to see anyone or anything within 20 feet. You can see out to 20 feet. So, again, when you look at Vow of Fortitude, Vow of Intuition, and Vow of the Fighter, there's really only going to be maybe one situation where I would choose Vow of Fortitude over Vow of the Fighter or Vow of Intuition, and that is if I am a ranged monk. And that is the only time, and even then it's going to be a hard sell because the blinded condition just doesn't happen that often. Whereas Vow of the Fighter, taking the blind sight, blind fighting style, gives you all the benefits you're generally going to get from Vow of Fortitude, and definitely all the benefits of Vow of Intuition, plus some extra benefits. So, again, that idea of here is 3 choices, but one of them is the right choice. One of them is always better than the other 2. What's the point of the other 2? It's just to give you the illusion of choice. So, both Vow of Fortitude and Vow of Intuition, I don't think need to exist. Vow of the Fighter takes care of that, and you could come up with something for ranged monks if you wanted to create a monastic vow that would benefit ranged monks. You can come up with something a lot better than Vow of Fortitude. So, yeah. Moving on. Vow of the Limber. When you make your first unarmed strike on your turn, you can choose to spend 1 focus point. If you do so, your reach with unarmed strikes is increased by 5 feet until the end of your turn. So, increasing range, there's a bunch of different reasons why increasing range is beneficial. Again, especially for a hypermobile thing. Increasing the range means... increasing the range of your attacks means that you can attack creatures more effectively, because you can attack them from further away. It means you can attack more creatures. Because you are just increasing the range of your unarmed strike, that means that you can still use Stunning Strike on them. You can still use anything else that kind of procs on an unarmed strike. We'll talk about some other stuff that can happen from that. It just gives you benefits, which is really, really nice. And again, I think Vow of the Limber and Vow of Freedom could be used to create a really, really great surgical strike monk. Because what would happen is the monk with their hypermobility, especially once they can run on walls and stuff like that, they can get exactly where they need to go to make the exact attack. One of my favorite examples is if you're dealing with concentration, which concentration is still a thing in Star Wars 5th edition. You're dealing with a spellcaster using a concentration spell. Most spellcasters that use concentration spells understand that getting hit is a bad thing, and so they will do everything they can to make sure they can't get hit. Vow of the Limber plus Vow of Freedom means your monk can run along a wall, get behind the enemy lines, go up, punch the dude, either get them to break concentration from damage or just stun them, which ends concentration instantly because they're incapacitated. And they don't have to worry about getting close enough to anyone to actually worry about getting an opportunity attack, because they can be outside of their attack range, depending on the monster. Again, there are some monsters that have 10, 15-foot attack ranges. Your mileage may vary, but Vow of the Limber can be used in that specific situation. There's a bunch of other situations where just being able to attack from further away, we'll talk about it when we talk about one of the other vows in a second here, can just be useful. So yeah, this is another one. It's prerequisite 7th level. So this is not something you take at second level. You have to wait until you're 7th. But I don't have a problem with that. This, I think, could be a little bit broken at 2nd level. It feels like a good thing to have at 7th level. So, yeah. Moving on. Vow of the Nemesis. This is marking. But not really. This kind of works... Okay, so... as a bonus action, choose a creature within 30 feet you can see. Creature makes a whiz save. On a successful save, they're immune for 24 hours. On a failed, for the next minute, the creature has disadvantage on attack rolls against creatures other than you, and it must make an additional wisdom saving throw each time it attempts to move to a space that is more than 30 feet away from you. If it succeeds on this saving throw, this feature doesn't restrict its movement for that turn. The feature ends early if you attack another creature, if you target another hostile creature with a power or class feature, if a friendly creature damages the target, if a friendly creature targets it with a power or class feature, or if you target another creature with this feature. So, I may mention before, I love 4th edition D&D. And one of my favorite aspects of 4th edition D&D was the marking feature. Marking was something that defenders, which were the tanks effectively, could do, and each different defender had a different flavor of mark. The defender that I played the most was a sword mage. And sword mages had the ability to mark at range, and depending on which kind of subclass of sword mage, it wasn't really a subclass, but you could choose different kind of marks. Depending on which version, different things would happen. And you would try to mark them in different ways. The one that I did, I think, was called the Intercepting Sword Mage, where what would happen is I would mark someone. If they hit a target other than me, they would have a -2 to any attack rolls they made against targets that weren't me. And if they were, even with the -2, even if they were able to make an attack and hits, I could instantly bounce over there and make a melee basic attack against them for free. So the way that was best used is you would mark a target, and then you would get as far away from them as possible, dealing with another enemy. And that target would have no ability to attack you, and so they would go and attack someone else. Not all the marking systems work that way. Some of the marking systems made it so that you would encourage them to attack you over other people. That's how the tank worked. This one worked a little bit differently. So Vow of the Nemesis is kind of based on that kind of marking system, where it basically highly encourages the enemy to attack only you. But there's so many limitations. First of all, it's a 13th level of ability, so you have to be really high to do this. The actual spell that it's mimicking, and I'm actually going to look it up before I say the wrong thing. I believe it's compelled to duel. Let's see if I can find it real quick. There we go. Yeah, compelled duel. So this is almost word for word compelled to duel. The difference being, this requires you to be 13th level. Compelled duel is a 1st level enchantment spell. And with all the limitations, which again are, I believe, almost identical to the limitations of compelled duel, this has literally only one use. This is, I want you to fight me and only me. And that's all you can do. You cannot fight anyone else. You cannot do anything that affects anyone else. And none of your allies can help you. You literally can only fight one-on-one with this creature. And anything other than that makes it completely useless. And for me, that it's so restrictive. And again, it's a 13th level of vow. I don't ever see this being useful. Monks are not one-on-one duelists. Like, they're not built that way. They can be, but it's just as easy to stunning strike them as it is to use a bonus action to do this. And it's not even something like the marking system where I could mark someone else to kind of help my allies out by giving them disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone other than me. Well, if I do literally anything other than attack this target, then it breaks. So there really is no benefit to this aside from, again, in a very specific situation where you have an enemy attacking an ally and that ally can't deal with it. You can use Vow of the Nemesis to get them to only attack you. But it's going to end pretty damn quick, because unless your monk is now focused on only dealing with this one to target and the party takes care of literally everything else, this is only going to last until your next ally attacks them. And again, monks are not designed to be one-on-one fighters. You don't control the action economy by focusing on only one target. Action economy control is looking at the entire battlefield. If you're playing a monk, you need to be aware of the entire battlefield, limiting yourself to just one target. Despite the fact that monks have a lot of tools at their disposal to make them very difficult to attack, and you could effectively use this to kind of kite them around. You are wasting so many of your actions and bonus actions not being able to affect literally anyone else on the battlefield, positively or negatively. There's nothing you can do but deal with this. I cannot come up with a build in my mind where Vow of the Nemesis is going to be a beneficial thing, especially since you have to be 13th level to do it. By 13th level, again, when you're looking at opportunity cost, by 13th level, your bonus action is really, really useful. There are so many things you can use your bonus action for. Like, by 7th level, you can use your bonus action to remove Charmed or Frightened condition. That is significantly more useful. You can get, at 13th level, you can get 3 attacks as your bonus action. It's never going to be beneficial to use your bonus action to use Vow of the Nemesis. There is not a situation where there aren't better options. In the situation where you have an ally that can't take another attack from this guy, stunning strike them. Grapple and move them. There are so many other things that you can do, especially, again, because you can do your grappling with your dexterity score. If you go up, you grapple them and literally just pull them away. Forced movement doesn't trigger opportunity attacks or anything. So you can literally just go up, grapple them, and pull them away from your ally so your ally can run away. And that would only take a single attack. That can be used for your attack action. It can be used any of your bonus action attacks. Anytime you make an attack, you can replace it with a grapple check. Vow of the Nemesis, this is another one of those things where, yes, we gave you 18 choices, but 3 of them are not choices that you would ever want to make. So, moving on. Vow of the Open Mind. You gain proficiency in a skill of your choice. Additionally, you can spend 1 focus point in 10 minutes meditating on a skill in which you are proficient. If you do so, when you make an ability check with the chosen skill, you can add your wisdom or charisma modifier to the check. You only have 1 instance of this feature active at a time. So, and this may be fixed on the website. I don't know. Again, the PDF that I'm using obviously is not 100% accurate to all the errata. We've already mentioned that. But the problem I have with this is it doesn't say when that additional bonus ends. Like, it just says that you can have it, and you can only have one active at a time. But does that mean that if I, before I go to bed, if I burn a focus point and spend 10 minutes meditating, then the next day when I have full focus points, I have this skill that I get to add my wisdom or charisma modifier to the two? From what I'm reading here, it doesn't have an endpoint. So that would, if you were to take this ability, every single time before a short or long rest, you would always use this because it's basically just free bonuses, which is nice. I would much rather see this have some sort of a limitation. That being said, if it was just, hey, you gain proficiency in a skill of your choice, I think it's kind of dumb. The fact that not only do you gain a proficiency in a skill, but you also now have a way to use focus points to improve a skill, that I think is a really cool thing. You know what? I would almost prefer, instead of just giving you an additional bonus, because that can get broken real quick. Insert picture of Rogue. I think it might be even cooler, and I think it would fit with this. You gain a proficiency in a skill of your point. Additionally, skill of your choice. Additionally, you can spend one focus point and 10 minutes meditating, and you get proficiency in a skill or tool for a set amount of time. Let's say an hour. An hour tends to be pretty nice, where it's not so broken that you're going to, anytime you do a short rest, you're going to just do this and get a thing. I think limit to an hour makes sense. It still makes it super useful. It is a single focus point, so it's not a huge cost. And giving you that versatility of, hey, I can be proficient in anything I need to be for an hour, would be a really cool thing. So yeah, as it's written here, my only issue with it is there's no end to it, so it's really easy to exploit. If they've already errated that out, where they do have some sort of an end, like I said, even as it's written, I would say an hour would probably be the best thing, because an hour means you can use it a lot, but it's not going to be broken to where you always just have effectively expertise in whatever skill that you want to for that day. So yeah, overall, it's a cool ability. I really like it. I think it's cool. I think it needs to be refined, is the only issue I have with it. So yeah, moving on. Vow of Precision. This one does have a prerequisite of 13th level, and it's super simple. It is a single sentence. Your critical hit range with unarmed strikes increases by 1. Expanding the critical hit range is a big deal, especially since your unarmed strikes get pretty big. Again, they get up to a D12. By the time you get this, they're already, I believe, at a D10. So that doubles the amount of time you're going to be getting critical hits. If you are combining this with other things, like maybe you took Vow of the Fighter and you took the blind fighting thing, and the room is completely dark, or there's magical to the darkness. Combining having advantage on your attack rolls, or even if you just have someone that has, I don't know if they have the equivalent of Fairy Fire in here. Again, I haven't looked through everything. I hope they do, because Fairy Fire is super useful. But just anything that gives you advantage on attack rolls combined with an expanded critical hit range is useful. My issue with it is, again, the monk is not a damage dealing class. And this does limit it a little bit too much for it to be as useful as it could be. We'll talk about an ability in a little bit here that this could benefit from, but it doesn't. But unarmed strikes, the big problem with unarmed strikes is there's no way to get a magic weapon unarmed strike. So, like, you can't use a flame tuck. Now, again, I don't know what the enhanced weapons are in this. I would assume they have ones that add additional damage. That has always been the limitation of the monk compared to the fighter, where the fighter uses weapons. So every additional attack a fighter makes not only is going to do additional damage from just the weapon itself, but they're using something like a flame tongue or a frost brand that does additional damage every time they hit. That adds up very, very quickly, where every additional attack starts now being multiples. You're almost getting exponential growth with how much additional damage you're doing. When you combine expanded crit ranges with things like the Paladin's Smite, or like Barbarians and their brutal criticals, where each critical hit does significantly more, that turns into a really, really big deal. With the monk, with this only working for unarmed strikes, all that means is when you do a critical hit, you will do maximum 2d12 instead of 1d12, or roughly an additional 7 damage 5% of the time more often. And that's not enough that is going to change a ton. Now, if you have things like, again, in 5th edition, they have like what's it called? Monk. Way of Mercy. The Way of Mercy monk effectively has a smite thing it can do. It can use Hand of Harm. Basically, when it attacks, it can add additional damage on. Well, the interesting thing about that is if you the way that critical hits work in just 5th edition in general is you roll double the number of dice you normally would. So anything that adds additional dice on gets really, really improved with critical hit. That's why paladins are so dangerous when they crit, because when they hit, they don't have to choose to smite until they see what they rolled. And so anytime they roll a nat 20, they're going to add on a smite, because that's an additional like 8d8 damage, depending on the spell level that they use to smite with. There isn't anything built into the monk that I can see. Again, I haven't looked at all the subclasses yet. There isn't anything I can see in the monk that would give them any huge benefit for unarmed strikes. So with this being a 13th level ability and it only working on unarmed strikes, it really isn't that useful. There's not a whole lot of things the monk can do where getting additional crits are going to be useful. Because again, the most useful thing that the monk can do generally isn't going to be the amount of damage that they do, which is what crits improve. It's going to be the other things they can draw. The stunning strikes, the movement that they can do, the ability to take attacks and waste attacks and the things like that from enemies. They're not really built to be damage dealers. And even though the Star Wars 5e version is a little bit closer to being more of a damage, the benefit from getting additional critical hits just isn't really there. With this being a 13th level ability, I would much rather see it just say your critical hit range is increased by 1. Instead of with unarmed strikes, just your critical hit range is increased by 1, because we're going to talk about another one in a little bit here that this would become very, very beneficial and could turn it into a damage dealing monk. So yeah, Vow of Precision, again, sounds much cooler than in practicality it actually is. From a statistical standpoint, a numbers standpoint, a math standpoint, it's just not worth using one of your 4 vows to get the limited improvement that you're going to get. By the time you're level 13, you're doing a lot more than just punching everyone and trying to do as much damage as you can. There are much better things you can do, and that's all critical hit range is going to improve, is the amount of damage you do. So, yeah. Moving on. The Vow of Requital. This is another one, prereq for 13th level. When you take the dodge action and an attack made by a creature within 5 feet of you misses you before the start of your next turn, you can use your reaction to make one melee weapon attack with a monk weapon or unarmed strike against the creature. This is kind of textbook action economy manipulation. What I mean by that is action economy in 5th edition is the biggest balancing factor. Whichever side has more things that they can do. So that includes movements, actions, bonus actions, and reactions is going to have an advantage. With Vow of Requital, it does force you to take the dodge action. However, with this version of the monk, no, it still requires patient defense. But you can patient defense, which is a single key point, to take the dodge action. And if you use 2 points, you get an additional reaction, so you could use this twice. This can be used extremely effectively to basically turn your reaction into another attack, which can turn into another stunning strike. It can turn into another ability that is activated upon getting a hit. Again, my big thing that I tend to think of is Way of Open Palm monks from D&D. They can trip people, they can push people as part of an attack. Yeah, just giving yourself the ability to make additional attacks is always useful. Monks are built around attacks. They're not built around damage. They're built around attacks. So, yes, this is very, very useful. For a 13th level ability, I think it might be a little bit overpowered, but you can also use a monk weapon, which can turn into other things depending on the enhanced weapon that you're using. Can make some pretty big things. So I can see why it's a 13th level. I could also see it justifiably being reduced to 7th level as well. I don't think it's something that should be 1st level, or 2nd level technically. I don't think it should have no limitations, but I could very easily see this not being super overpowered at 7th level. But otherwise, yeah, it's just useful. Again, if you're playing a monk, you do want to focus on the idea that the more attacks you can make, the more things you can do. And damage is not going to be your main focus. Something that happened to me constantly when I was playing a monk is I would make 2 or 3 attacks, and then at the end of my turn, or after I'm done, I do this, this, and this. Okay, good. I'm done. The DM would go, what about damage? I'm like, oh yeah, I actually do damage with this too. Damage is such a secondary thought to me when I'm playing a monk that I don't even think about it. Because the amount of damage I do, it's not a small amount, but it's not the best part of my attacks. It's generally everything else that happens when I attack. So understand, monks are all about attacks. They're not all about damage. And Vow of Requital leans into that at giving you additional attacks. Moving on. Vow of Restoration. When you would make an unarmed strike, you can spend 1 focus point instead to touch a willing creature within your reach. Roll your martial arts die. The target gains hit points equal to the amount rolled plus your wisdom or charisma modifier, your choice minimum 1. This is effectively Hands of Healing from the Way of Mercy monk. The problem with this, and again, this is why, just like Vow of the Devoted, Vow of Restoration should be part of a subclass. It should not be an a la carte thing that you can just take. Is it never gets any better. If you put it as part of a subclass, you can upgrade it as the character gets better. Because at level 2, this is a really useful thing. But as anyone is that's played 5th edition knows, healing in 5th edition is a bit underpowered. Generally, the absolute best thing you can do with your healing is to heal people that are at 0 hit points to bring them to consciousness again. Almost universally, that is the best use of your healing, with a few rare exceptions. You generally, once you get to about mid tier 2, and definitely once you get to tier 3 and to tier 4, you really can't offset the amount of hit points enemies can deal using your healing skills in combat. Outside of combat, they're really useful. Inside of combat, there are better things you can do with your action. This allows you to replace an unarmed strike and heal someone. But, again, once you get to mid tier 2 and then to tier 3 and tier 4, even with a D12, you're looking at burning a focus point and getting rid of maybe a single attack's worth of hit points. And more likely than not, at high levels like that, you're only going to be taking a fraction of a single attack. And most monsters are going to have multi-attack, where they're going to be doing 3 or 4 attacks at that level. It's just really not that beneficial. If you look at the Way of Mercy, as you get higher up, you also can do things like cure blinded, deafened, paralyzed, poisoned, or stunned from a creature when you use your Hands of Healing. Again, Hands of Healing gets more useful as you level up because it's part of the subclass. So Vow of Restoration, there's no limit to it, but again, it's only really useful at low levels, or to basically wake up characters that have fallen unconscious due to damage. Those are the only 2 situations where it's ever going to be useful, and that use is going to be limited because there's other things that you can use it for. You can burn a single focus point. A single focus point can be 2 attacks. Those 2 attacks can also turn into stunning strikes, which removes action, movement, bonus action, and reaction from a target for an entire round. Yes, technically that requires 2 if it's Flurry of Blows and that, but when you're looking at opportunity cost of what's the best way to use your focus points, Vow of Restoration is at low levels is going to be useful. Once you get to about level 5, it's going to be significantly less useful, and then once you get probably around level 9 or to 10, it's just not going to be useful anymore, and you will have taken one of your 4 vows, which again, most games are going to end around level 10, level 12, so half, only 2 you get in that point, half of them are going to be an ability that for half of your character life is really not that great. So this is another one that I think I would much rather see as part of a subclass, to where it can be upgraded and can be incentivized and turned into something that no matter what level you are, there's still something useful about it. And as an a la carte method, just like Vow of the Devoted, it's just not useful. So, moving on. Vow of Serenity. Your maximum focus is increased by an amount equal to half your wisdom or charisma modifier, your choice, minimum +1. This one, again, this is another one kind of like Vow of Precision. This sounds significantly more useful than it actually is. It doesn't state here whether you're supposed to roll up or roll down. The overall rule of 5th edition that is in the SRD, which is what this is based on, is you always roll down. So Vow of Serenity, you increase your maximum focus by an amount equal to half your wisdom or charisma modifier, which is 1 or 2. So you can use one of your 4 monastic vows, or again, 2 useful monastic vows, to get 1 additional key point or focus point per short rest, or 2 additional focus points per short rest. And again, there's other things built into the class. Things like Perfect Self gives you 6 focus points instead of 4. Like, there's already stuff that makes it easier for you to use your focus points. So as much as it sounds useful, it really isn't. 1 additional focus point is not going to make a huge difference. 2 additional focus points might at lower levels. At high levels, 2 focus points is useless. And if they do say, well, you can round up 3 focus points at high levels is not going to be useful. So yeah, this is like Vow of Serenity. There's only 2 different ways it could be. It's either it's going to be mostly useless or it's going to be overpowered, because one of the defining features of the monks is their focus points. It is their limited resource. Whenever you give more of a limited resource, you risk unbalancing the class. So anytime you're going to be modifying that limited resource, you have to really look into all the different ways it's going to change balance. So this is another one that, as it's written here, they took the safe route and made it almost useless. It's not worth one of your 4 vows. When there's so many better things that you could do with this, it's not worth it. If they made it, you could increase your maximum focus by your wisdom or charisma modifier, where it wasn't half, then it would be overpowered, because now that any monk is always going to get a significantly better use. Like there isn't a better use of your monastic vows if you can get a 5 extra points. And there's a very good chance that by level 8 you can have a +5 to your wisdom or charisma. It's not difficult to do whatsoever. Starting, you are probably going to start with a 16 in it, minimum. So yeah, Vow of Spirit, I just don't see a way, or not Vow of Spirit, Vow of Serenity, I just don't see a way to make it useful. This is another one of those, hey, I've given you 10 different options, but 3 of them just are never useful. And you didn't really give me 10, you gave me 7. So, moving on. Vow of Spirit. You can use your choice of wisdom or charisma instead of strength or dexterity for the attack and damage rolls of your unarmed strikes and monk weapons. You must use the same modifier for both rolls. This is another one basically just like Vow of the Focused. Monks are multi-attribute dependent classes, mad classes. And that is a limiting factor for them. Because of that, they can't take as many feats because they have to improve 2 different things. With this, again, this is another one where I'd really have to see is this a min-maxer's thing of choice? Because while yes, it means that you can kind of ignore dexterity and just be a purely kind of wisdom-based monk or charisma-based monk, your AC is going to suffer for it. There's nothing that allows you to add your wisdom or charisma score twice. You are always going to be a multi-attribute dependent class. So using this to effectively replace your dexterity, again, doesn't make a ton of sense for me, because you're not going to be able to ignore your dexterity. You need your dexterity for so many other things. And you can make a strength-based monk, but so many other, your acrobatics, your ability to grapple and things like that, you can't use your wisdom for that. You have to use either your strength or dexterity. Your armor class is reliant on your dexterity. Yeah, I missed one. I'll go back to it in just a second here. But yeah, this is another one where I'm just like, okay, it sounds more useful than it actually is. It sounds like you're going to be able to make the monk a single attribute dependent class, which would be huge. It would be to the point of kind of breaking the class, because that's a limiting factor to it. And this doesn't allow you to do that, because you're always going to need your dexterity for a bunch of other things. You're never going to be able to make a purely wisdom based monk, because it just won't work. So this would be another one that I kind of put in the same boat as Vow of Serenity. It sounds cool. It's not going to be worth one of your 4 vows. Yeah. Moving on. I forgot this one because I was just reading things and there's lots of words. Vow of the Sentry. You gain proficiency in light and medium armor. Additionally, you can now gain the benefits of your martial arts and unarmored movement features while wearing light or medium armor as long as you are not wielding a shield. So this effectively allows you to wear armor as a monk. One thing that they don't mention is here, you do not get unarmored defense. So the thing that allows you to add your to calculate your AC by Dex plus Wisdom plus 10 doesn't work with this. So it does mean that you are no longer going to get the benefit from either your Wisdom or your Charisma score to your armor class. And even with medium armor, like studded leather armor, which is going to generally be your better one, is going to be a +2 to your armor class. Your Wisdom score is already better than that. Right from the beginning. So that really isn't better. If you go to medium armor, you can get a higher higher armor class bonus, but it limits the amount of dexterity that you can add to the armor. So again, Vow of the Sentry, you're going to have a lower armor class wearing armor than you are just using unarmored defense. The only benefit to this is it does allow you to take advantage of magic armor, but even then, again, medium armor for the most part is not going to be beneficial for you because you're a dexterity-based class. Medium armor is generally going to cap your dex bonus to either +2 or +3. You're not going to want to have a +2 or a +3 your dex. You're going to want a +4 or +5 because you use it for so many other things. So you're generally going to be using light armor where you can get the full bonus from it. And until you get like studded +3 studded leather armor, which is the most powerful light armor you're probably going to be able to find. I don't know what light armor is in this one. I'm using D&D terms. I'm assuming they have an equivalent in here. That is going to give you a +5, a base 15 to your armor class. Because studded leather armor is 12, and then a +3 will give you a base 15. That's a 20 wisdom. Which by the time you can get +3 studded leather armor, you're already going to have a 20 wisdom. So there really isn't a benefit to Vow of the Sentry other than I want to be an armor-wearing monk, and I'm going to take a disadvantage to do that. In that particular instance, I would say flavor text it. If you want to be, if you want to wear Mandalorian armor and be a Mandalorian monk, flavor text it. Mechanically, it's not that big a deal. It really isn't. Just flavor text it. Claim that you wear cool looking armor. That's the nice thing about D&D is you can make your characters look like whatever you want them to. It doesn't actually matter what their actual armor is. Just flavor text it. So Vow of the Sentry, another one that's just, I don't see a benefit to ever taking Vow of the Sentry. Again, especially since you only get 4 of these, and there are other things that are significantly more useful that you're going to get benefits from that you're just not going to get from Vow of the Sentry. I guess one thing that might be useful, because again, I don't know how they deal with vacuum in this, is being able to wear light armor. It's possible. And again, if you're more familiar with the system than I am, let me know in the comments down below if this is a thing. It might be that Vow of the Sentry allows you to basically do all your really cool monk shit while wearing a spacesuit or whatever you need to wear to be in the vacuum of space. If that's a thing, then yeah, if you want to be a 0G monk, I could see that being beneficial. That is the only situation where that would be beneficial. And again, you would be lowering your armor class in order to do that. So, yeah. Moving on. Finally, we get Vow of the Versatile. When you would make an unarmed strike as part of your martial arts bonus action attack or your flurry of blows, you could instead make a weapon attack with a monk weapon you are wielding. using your martial arts die in place of the weapons damage. So a little of this is redundant. You're like using your martial arts die in place of the weapons damage. That's how monk weapons work. So there's no reason to have that sentence there. However, this would probably be the most important vow if you wanted to create a damage dealing monk. And the reason I say that is this allows you to use enhanced weapons. And it doesn't matter what enhanced weapon they are. Again, turning this to D&D because I know it better. Daggers are monk weapons. So that means they can use the monk damage die. But you can get magic daggers. They can do things like daggers that do additional poison damage or things like that. So you would be sacrificing none of your damage die because you get to just replace it with whatever your monk damage die is. But you get extra things that you can do with it. Combine that with, again, talking about things like flame tongue weapons or whatever the equivalent of those are. You know, lightsabers maybe. I don't know. Vow of the Versatile allows you to actually use your unarmed, your flurry of blows and all the additional attacks they give you to get some serious damage. If you wanted to be a damage dealing monk, again, I think you would be kind of missing a few of the aspects of the monk to specialize in dealing damage. But in Star Wars 5th edition, I think you can do that. You have to have a very particular build, but I think you can make a damage-dealing monk here that doesn't really work in 5th edition. And that's why when I talked about Vow of Precision, why I think Vow of Precision would be significantly better and actually useful if it just said your critical hit range increased by 1. Because then it now works with Vow of the Versatile. Vow of the Versatile has no prereqs. So right at level 2, you can go, I'm a weapons monk. This effectively turns you into a Kensei from D and D. But even better. This allows you to really kind of focus on, like if you think of wuxia films, things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Chow Yun-Fat's character is a master of this sword. You see this in like Hero, the film with Jet Li. You have in Chinese folklore, and technically in Chinese history too, there are martial artists that, well, yeah, they did learn unarmed combat. Their specialty was a particular weapon. And they always used that weapon. If you look at Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Lu Bu was known to be not just a master of the spear, he was a demon with it. He was so incredibly powerful with his spear. He didn't go up and punch people or anything. He beat the snot out of them on horseback with a giant freaking spear. With Vow of the Versatile, you can create that style of monk. You can create that monk that has focused their life entirely on perfecting a single weapon, which is unbelievably common in Chinese folklore and Japanese folklore, where people would spend their entire lives, like the entire premise of the movie Hero with Jet Li is that he spent his entire life perfecting a single technique that within a certain distance, spoiler alert, within a certain distance would be unblockable. That he would be able to kill someone as long as he could get within a certain distance of someone. There would be nothing that anyone could do to stop him from using this technique because he had perfected it so well that there was no defense to it in a certain distance. And so the whole plot of Hero was him killing these world-renowned martial artists because each one of them had a price on their head from the emperor, and by killing each one, one of the rewards he got was money, and he got to be close to the emperor because the emperor would. So killing one, you got to be within 50 paces. Killing two, you got to be within 30 paces. Killing three of them, you got to be within 20 paces. And at the end of the movie, he's like, "Yeah, I needed to get within 20 paces of you, so that's how I did it. I wanted to assassinate you. I've spent my entire life developing this technique, and now there's nothing you can do. You're dead. Congratulations. If you wanted to create a character like that, and I may be mixing up Hero with another movie, but there's a movie with Jet Li, and I thought it was that one. It may be another one. Feel free to correct me in the comments below. But anyway, if you wanted to create a character like that, Vow of the Versatile allows you to do that. And like I said, Vow of Precision, I really don't see that ever being useful for just unarmed strikes. But if you make it for all attacks, your critical hit range, then it works with Vow of the Versatile, definitely, but it also works with anything else. A lot of monks mix monk weapon and unarmed strikes. Their flurry of blows and their extra attacks are always unarmed strikes, but most monks have at least one weapon. The monk that I played, Aether, actually had it was a dagger, but I reskinned it as a sai. And he actually got a rune in Storm King's Thunder that allowed him. It basically did an additional d6 of fire damage anytime it hit. I really liked it. I couldn't use it for my flurry of blows or anything, but I always had it in hand because it's a finesse weapon and it allowed me to use defensive duelists. Because in D&D, unarmed strikes are not finesse strikes, so I had to have that for my defensive duelist. And it meant when I was making my regular attack action attacks, I would do extra damage, and then my bonus action would be my unarmed strikes. So yeah, that's Vow of the Versatile. So, and I know this is a very, very long video, but, you know, it's complicated stuff. Wow, almost 2 hours. Thank you for everyone watching. Final thoughts. Overall, again, I think Monastic Vows, they take a system that already exists in D&D, which is effectively Eldritch Invocations, and they gave Eldritch Invocations to everyone. Okay, that I understand. And again, for people that want that little extra bit of customizability, I think this is a good way to go about it. However, this is a mixed bag. Of the 18 that they offer you, I think we found like a third of them at least are not useful for various reasons. Some of them just aren't useful at all. Others, like Vow of the Devoted or Vow of Restoration, need to be a part of a subclass in order to actually be useful, because they need to be upgraded. They need to be incentivized to be able to build it in with the rest of the monk kit, and making them a la carte like this just doesn't work. So overall, even if we take out the 6 or 7 that don't work, you still have or it might be up to I think it's, well, let's look, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 yeah, so about 8. So instead of the 18 that they have here, you only really have about 10 decent choices. That being said, again, my rule of thumb is if you're going to give some kind of list like this, you need to have at least double the number of choices that are ever going to be made. Otherwise, it turns into, okay, choose the next less bad one as you level up the character, and that's never fun. So even only having 10 viable choices here, that's still pretty good. And this is the player's handbook. I know they have expansions where they have a bunch of other subclasses and things like that. I do not know if they have additional vows in their expansions. I haven't looked into that. But again, the Eldritch Invocation system that Monastic Vows is basically based on is something that can be homebrewed and things like that. Like creating new options for it is a little bit easier than creating like a full subclass or something like that. So I think it's a prime system that has a lot of potential. I don't think it's really met its potential here. There's some cool stuff here, don't get me wrong, and I think it's interesting. I don't think it's quite where it needs to be for me to say, yes, this is definitely better than what they have in D&D 5th edition. I think it still needs some refining. So, that being said, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your weird monk that you want to make with any of these features? What is the weirdest thing you can come up with for the monk? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I'll see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.